The man shouldn't be alive. That was what Blaine's first thought when she found him collapsed against the barn wall, his shirt soaked black with blood that had already stopped flowing hours ago. His hand was clenched around, something with such force that his knuckles had gone white as bone. She'd seen dying men before. Her father had taught her the signs, but this one's chest still rose and fell, shallow and steady, even as the wound in his abdomen gaped open like a mouth, screaming silently. The strangest part wasn't that he'd survived the night. It was that he'd chosen her barn, her land, as if he'd been looking for her specifically. 3 days earlier, Willa had buried her last horse. The sickness had taken them all within a week, leaving her with a ranch she couldn't work and debts she couldn't pay. The neighbors whispered it was a curse that her father's sins had finally come home. She'd stopped listening to whispers years ago when they'd found his body in the canyon with a bullet in his back and called an accident. Now she stood 5 feet from a man who would get her killed if anyone found him here. His dark hair was matted with dust and blood. His face was angular, hard in a way that spoke of survival, not cruelty. Apache without question. The pattern of his clothing, what was left of it, told her that much. The wound told her more. Someone had shot him at close-range execution style, but he'd managed to escape. Willa's hand moved instinctively to the rifle, leaning against the barn door. The smart thing would be to ride into town. Tell the marshal, let them handle it. The safe thing. But her father had always said the smart thing and the right thing were rarely the same. And he died, proving it. She knelt beside the man, her knees sinking into the dirt still, damp from last night's rain. His breathing didn't change. Up close, she could see the object in his hand wasn't a weapon. It was small, metallic, catching the early morning light. She reached for his fingers, trying to pry them open gently. His eyes snapped open. They were black as the bottom of a well, and just as deep. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his lips parted, and he spoke a single word in a voice like gravel scraping stone. The word meant nothing to her, but the urgency in it made her blood run cold. She pulled back, but his other hand shot out faster than a man that injured should move, catching her wrist. Not threatening, pleading. He said the word again, and this time she heard the desperation underneath. His grip loosened, and his hand fell back to his chest. Unconscious again, or dead, she couldn't tell which. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs as she finally managed to open his clenched fist. What she found there made no sense. The object was a tarnished silver medallion on a broken chain, engraved with initials she recognized immediately. Initials that had been carved into the wooden cross at her father's grave. J.B. James Blaine, her father's medallion, the one he'd been wearing the day they found his body, the one that had disappeared from his belongings before the burial. She looked down at the dying man in her barn, her mind racing through impossible explanations. He shouldn't have this. No, one should have this unless he'd been there. Unless he knew what really happened in that canyon 5 years ago. Unless everything she'd been told about her father's death was a lie. The sound of hoof beatots on the road made her freeze. Multiple horses moving fast heading toward her property. She had maybe 2 minutes before whoever was hunting this man found him. And when they did, they'd find her too. She looked at the medallion in her palm, then at the man who'd carried it across miles of wilderness to collapse at her door. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to save herself. Instead, Will Blaine made a choice that would destroy everything she thought she knew about honor, justice, and the night her father died. Willa dragged him through the barn door with strength born from pure adrenaline. His body was dead, weight heavier than it looked, and she left a dark smear of blood across the dirt floor. The hoof beats grew louder. She had seconds, not minutes. The old feed storage beneath the barn had a trap. Door her father had built during the territorial conflicts. She yanked it open, the hinges screaming in protest, and rolled the unconscious man into the darkness below. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud. She threw hay, bales over the door just as 3 riders burst into view. They weren't lawmen. Lawmen didn't ride with rifles already drawn or were kerchiefs pulled up over their faces. They dismounted in her yard without asking permission, their boots heavy on her porch steps. The leader knocked once, then pushed through her door before she could answer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of dirty ice. Behind him came two others, younger but no less dangerous. "Morning, Miss Blaine." His voice carried false courtesy. "We're looking for someone. An Indian wounded. You seen anything unusual?" Will kept her face blank, her hand resting casually near the kitchen knife. "I see unusual things every day. You'll need to be more specific. Don't play games." He moved closer, invading her space deliberately. "Tracks lead right to your property. Fresh blood on your barn wall. Now, where is he? I found blood this morning. Thought it was from a coyote that got into my hen house last week." She met his stare without flinching. Didn't see anyone. The man studied her face, looking for cracks in her composure. Then he smiled, and it was worse than his threats. "Your father was a good man, Miss Blaine. Shame what happened to him. Accident, they said. But accidents happen to people who interfere in business. That doesn't concern them." Her blood went cold. The way he said it, the emphasis on accident, told her everything. This man knew. Maybe he'd even been there. "Get off my property. We will soon as we search your barn." She didn't move. "You got a warrant?" "Don't need one for an Indian, especially not one who killed 2 men last night." He pushed past her toward the barn, his men following. "You're harboring a murderer, ma'am. That's a hanging offense." Will's mind raced. If they found him, they'd kill him on sight, and probably her, too, for hiding him. But something about the leader's words didn't sit right. 2 men killed the medallion. Her father's death wasn't an accident. She followed them to the barn, watching as they kicked through hay bales and overturned equipment. The leader moved, methodically, checking every corner, every shadow. He was thorough, professional. He'd done this before. His boots stopped inches from the trapdoor. Willa's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought he'd hear it. His eyes swept the floor, noting the fresh drag marks in the dirt, the disturbed hay, the blood trail that ended abruptly at the bales. He knelt down, his hand reaching for the hay. "You married, Miss Blaine?" he asked without looking up. The question caught her off guard. "What? Living out here alone? Pretty woman like you seems dangerous." His fingers brushed the edge of a bale. "Lots of things can happen to a woman alone. Accidents, fires, animals." The threat was clear. She needed to give him something, anything to make him leave. "I saw someone," she said quickly, running east toward the canyon about an hour before sunrise. "I didn't get a good look, but he was moving fast." The leader stood slowly, his eyes boring into hers. He didn't believe her, but he also couldn't prove she was lying. "Not yet. If you're lying, Miss Blaine, I'll be back. And next time there won't be any talking." They mounted their horses and rode east. But Willa knew they wouldn't go far. They'd circle back, watch the property, wait for her to make a mistake. She waited until the dust settled before opening the trapdoor. The man below hadn't moved. For a terrible moment, she thought he'd died from the fall. Then his eyes opened. Again, and this time they stayed open. He saw the medallion still clutched in her hand, and something in his expression broke. Not fear, recognition. And beneath it, a grief so raw it made her chest ache. He whispered one word, a name. "James." Will pulled him from the cellar with a rope tied under his arms, every muscle in her body screaming. He tried to help, pushing with his legs, but his strength was nearly gone. She dragged him into the house and barred the door behind them. The wound needed immediate attention. She'd tended injured animals before, even stitched up. Her father once after a barbed wire accident, but this was different. The bullet had torn through muscle and possibly nicked something vital. If infection set in, he'd be dead by morning. She heated water on the stove and gathered what supplies she had. Whiskey for cleaning, needle and thread, clean cloth torn from an old sheet. Her hand shook as she cut away his shirt, exposing the full extent of the damage. He watched her through half-closed eyes, His jaw clenched against the pain. When she poured whiskey directly into the wound, he made no sound, but his body went rigid as iron. "This is going to hurt worse," she said, threading the needle. His hand caught her wrist, not rough but firm. He pulled her closer, and with enormous effort, he spoke. His English was broken, strained, but clear enough. "James Blaine, your father. How do you know that name? He saved my sister 5 winters ago." Each word seemed to cost him. "Men came to our camp hunting. Your father stopped them. They shot him for it." Willa's world tilted. Everything she'd been told, everything she'd believed for 5 years cracked open like a rotten egg. They said it was an accident, a stray bullet during a hunting trip. No accident. His breathing grew more labored. "I was there. I saw." "Who were they?" "One man. Same man who came today." His eyes locked onto hers. "He leads them. The others follow. They hunt my people for sport. Your father found out. He tried to stop it." The needles slipped from her fingers. The leader with the ice-colored eyes. He'd threatened her, mentioned her father's death, made sure she understood the connection. He wanted her to know he'd killed James Blaine. "Why do you have his medallion?" "He gave it to my sister before he died. Made her promise to keep it safe, to bring it to you if anything happened to him." Kale's voice was fading. "She died 3 months ago. Sickness. I promised I would finish her task." Will looked down at the medallion, understanding flooding through her. Her father hadn't been killed in an accident. He'd been murdered for defending people everyone else wanted dead. And this man had crossed hostile territory, risked his life, taken a bullet, all to keep a promise to a dying woman. She picked up the needle again. "I'm going to sew this shut now. It'll hurt." He nodded once. She worked. Quickly, her stitches tight and even. He never made a sound, but sweat poured down his face, and his hands gripped the table edge until the wood creaked. When she finally tied off the last stitch, he was barely conscious. "What's your name?" she asked, washing the blood from her hands. "Cale. Cale. Those men are coming back. They'll watch this place. Wait for me to slip up. And when they come through that door, they'll kill both of us." She met his eyes. "Can you ride?" "Not yet. Then we have a problem because they know you're here. It's just a matter of time before they find proof." He tried to sit up and failed, falling back against the table. "Leave me. Save yourself. My father died protecting your people. I'm not going to dishonor that by letting them finish what they started." She grabbed a blanket and spread it on the floor near the stove. "Besides, you haven't told me who else was there that night. Who else pulled the trigger?" His eyes closed, exhausted beyond measure. But before he lost consciousness, he said something that made her blood freeze. "Your father's best friend, the man he trusted most." The name he spoke was one she knew, one that had sat at her dinner table, one that had helped carry the casket at the funeral, one that had looked her in the eye and called James Blaine's murder an accident. Marshall Thomas Reeves. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. The storm was coming, and so were the men who'd killed her father. The rain started at midnight, hammering the roof like 1,000 angry fists. Willa sat by the window with her father's rifle across her lap, watching the darkness for movement. Kyle slept fitfully near the stove, his fever climbing despite the cold. Compresses she'd been changing every hour. She'd spent the evening piecing together fragments of truth from what he'd told her. Her father had discovered Marshall Reeves and his men hunting Apache families for bounties that didn't officially exist. James Blaine had confronted his best friend, threatened to expose everything. 3 days later, he was dead. The story everyone believed was simple. Tragic accident during a hunting trip, stray bullet, wrong place, wrong time. The marshal himself had delivered the news, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking as he described finding the body. All eyes. What awoke most was how easily she believed it. How she let Reeves hold her while she cried at the funeral. How she trusted him when he'd promised to look after her to make sure she was safe. He'd been watching her all along, making sure she never asked the wrong questions. A knock at the door made her jump. She moved to the window, rifle ready. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a single figure on the porch. Tall, wearing a long coat, hands raised to show he was unarmed. He knocked again, his voice carrying through the storm. "Willa, I know you're in there. We need to talk." She didn't answer. "Those men who came by earlier, they're not lawmen. They're dangerous. If you're hiding someone, if you've gotten yourself mixed up in something, I can help." His tone was paternal, concerned, the same tone he'd used when she was 13 and her mother died. "Your father would want me to protect you." The words made her sick. She glanced at Kyle. He was awake now, his eyes tracking her movements. He'd heard the voice and recognized it. His hand moved slowly toward the knife she'd left on the table beside him. "I'm going to count to 10, Willa. Then I'm coming in." Reeves's voice hardened. "I don't want to do this the hard way." She made a decision. Leaning the rifle against the wall, she unbarred the door and opened it just enough to face him. Rain soaked her. Immediately, Reeves stood on her porch, older than she remembered, his face lined with years of lies. He smiled when he saw her, relieved. "Thank God. I was worried they'd already. What? Kill me like you killed my father." His smile faltered. For just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not surprise, calculation. Who's been filling your head with stories? Someone who was there. Someone who watched you put a bullet in James Blaine's back. The pretense dropped like a mask. His hand moved to the pistol at his hip, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Where is he? Gone. Bled out and died. This morning, I buried him near the canyon. The lie came easily. "You're a terrible liar, Willa. Always have been." He pushed past her into the house before she could stop him, his eyes sweeping the room. They landed on the blood-stained table, the medical supplies, the blanket by the stove, and on Cale, who was trying and failing to stand. Reeves drew his pistol in one smooth motion, aiming it directly at Cale's chest. "Step away from him, Willa." She didn't move. Instead, she stepped between them, blocking the shot. "No, he's a murderer. So are you." Reeves's jaw tightened. "Your father was going to destroy everything. Good men, families. All because he couldn't understand that. Some things are necessary." His voice dropped. "I gave him a chance to walk away. He refused. What happened after that was his choice. He died protecting innocent people. He died protecting savages who just as soon scalp you as. Look at you." Reeves took a step closer. "Now move, or I'll put a bullet through you to get to him." Behind her, Cale spoke, his voice weak but clear. "She has proof written. Testimony, your name, everything." It was a bluff. But Reeves didn't know that. His eyes narrowed, trying to determine if it was true. "Where?" "Hidden. Safe. If anything happens to us, it goes to the territorial governor." The moment stretched like hot glass. Reeves' finger trembled on the trigger. Outside, more horses approached through the storm, his men coming to finish what they'd started. They were out of time. Reeves lowered his pistol an inch, his mind working through the implications. If testimony existed, killing them now would only seal his fate. But if he let them live, they'd talk eventually. He was trapped, and he knew it. The sound of boots on the porch made the decision for him. 3 of his men burst through the door, rain-soaked and eager. The leader, the one with ice-colored eyes, smiled when he saw Cale. "Found him. About time." Reeves held up his hand. "Wait. Wait for what? You said no. Witnesses. Kill them both and burn the place. No one will know. She has documentation, names, dates, everything." Reeves kept his voice level. "We need to find it first." The leader's smile vanished. His eyes moved between Willa and Reeves, suspicion blooming. "You're going soft, old man. Same mistake you made with her father." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Reeves's face darkened, but before he could respond, Cale moved. Despite his injury, despite the fever burning through him, he lunged for the knife on the table. He didn't make it. The leader's rifle butt caught him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. Willis screamed and dropped to her knees beside him, her body shielding his. The leader raised his rifle again, aiming at the back of her head. "Leave her." Reeves's voice cracked like a whip. "I said wait. We've been waiting 5 years for you two." Clean up your mess. I'm done waiting. The leader's finger moved to the trigger. She knows too much. He's already dead. Just finish it. In that moment, Willis saw the truth with crystalline clarity. Reeves hadn't come to kill her. He'd come to save her in his twisted way. He'd convinced himself that what happened to her father was necessary, justified. But he'd never stopped caring about James Blaine's daughter. That hesitation, that weakness, was the only reason she was still breathing. But his men had no such attachments. She made her choice in the space between heartbeats. Grabbing the knife from where it had fallen, she spun and slashed upward in one fluid motion. The blade caught the leader across his forearm, making him drop the rifle with a howl of pain. Chaos erupted. Reeves fired at his own man, the bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him backward. The other two men froze, unsure who to aim at. Will grabbed Cale under the arms and dragged him toward the back door, adrenaline giving her impossible strength. Go! Reeves shouted at her, firing twice more to keep his men pinned. Get out of here. She didn't question it, didn't stop to wonder why. She just ran, hauling Cale through the back door and into the storm. Behind them, gunfire erupted inside the house, followed by shouting and the crash of furniture. The corral was 20 yards away, her remaining horse inside. Kyle was barely conscious, his stitches torn open, blood mixing with rain. She threw him over the horse's back and climbed up behind him, her arms wrapped tight to keep him from falling. A bullet winded past her ear. She kicked the horse hard and they burst from the corral into the darkness. More shots followed them, but the storm swallowed them whole. Lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape in stark white snapshots. The canyon was ahead, the same canyon, where her father had died, where this had all started. Kyle's weight sagged against her. She could feel his blood soaking through her shirt, hot despite the cold rain. He was dying. Without proper care, without rest, he wouldn't survive the night. But stopping meant death for both of them. Stay with me, she whispered into his ear, her voice lost in the thunder. You didn't come this far to die now. His hand found hers, gripping weakly. He was trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She leaned closer, pressing her ear to his lips. Canyon, your father, cave. Each word was a struggle, something hidden there. He wanted you to have it. Before she could ask what he meant, the horse stumbled. They were at the canyon's edge, the same cliff where James Blaine's body had been found. Below, in the darkness, she could barely make out the rocky slope and rushing water at the bottom. Behind them, more horses approached. Torches burned through the rain like angry eyes. At least 6 riders, maybe more. They brought everyone. Willow looked down at the canyon, then back at the approaching torches. There was nowhere left to run, no way out. They were trapped between the edge of the world and the men who wanted them dead. Kyle's eyes opened one last time, looking up at her face. Despite everything, despite the pain and the certainty of death, he smiled. Trust, he whispered. Then he pushed them both off the cliff. The fall lasted forever and ended in an instant. They hit water so cold it knocked the air from Willa's lungs. The current grabbed them immediately, violent and unforgiving, dragging them downstream through the darkness. She kept one arm locked around Kyle, the other clawing for anything solid. Her shoulder slammed into a rock, spinning them sideways. Her head went under. Water filled her mouth, her nose. She kicked hard, breaking the surface just long enough to gasp before the current pulled them under again. Then, as suddenly as it began, the water slowed. They'd reached a calmer stretch. Will's feet touched bottom, and she hauled Cale toward the bank with the last of her strength. They collapsed on a narrow strip of rocky shore, both of them coughing up river water. Above them on the canyon rim, torches moved back and forth. Voices echoed off the stone walls, distorted by distance in the rushing water. The men thought they were dead. Willa needed them to keep thinking that. She checked Cale's wound in the darkness, her hands exploring what she couldn't see. The stitches had torn completely. He was bleeding again badly. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold as the river that had nearly killed them. The cave he managed between, clenched teeth 20 yards upstream behind the waterfall. She looked where he indicated and saw nothing but darkness and white water. But she trusted him. She'd fallen off a cliff because he'd asked her to trust him. And somehow they'd survived. She got him to his feet, his arm draped over her shoulders, and they moved along the bank. Every step was agony for both of them. Her shoulder screamed where it had hit the rock. His blood left a trail on the stones. The waterfall was smaller than she'd expected, barely 6 feet high, a thin sheet of water pouring over a lip of rock. Behind it, just as Cale had said, was an opening. They pushed through the falling water into absolute darkness. Willa felt along the cave wall until her hand found what she was looking for, a shelf. On it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a tin box. Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely open it. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Even in the near darkness, she could make out her father's handwriting, names, dates, locations, a complete record of everything Reeves and his men had done, every family they'd hunted, every life they'd taken, every bounty they'd collected from wealthy ranchers who wanted the land cleared of Apache presence. At the bottom of the box was a letter addressed to her. She couldn't read it in the darkness, but she didn't need to. She understood now why her father had died. He'd gathered proof, real, undeniable proof, and he'd hidden it here in the place where he'd probably known they would eventually kill him, ensuring that even in death, the truth would survive. Kyle had collapsed against the cave wall, his breathing ragged. She pressed her hand against his wound, trying to slow the bleeding. It wasn't working. He needed real medical attention, a doctor's supplies she didn't have. "Why did you bring this to me?" she asked. "You could have used it yourself, taken it to the authorities." His laugh was bitter and weak. Who would believe in Apache? They'd burn it without reading. But you, James Blaine's daughter, they'd have to listen. You risked everything for this. For me. I promised my sister. And your father saved her life. His eyes met hers in the darkness. Some debts can never be repaid, only honored. Outside the cave, the voices grew louder. The men hadn't given up. They were coming down into the canyon, searching the banks. It would only be a matter of time before they found the cave. Will looked at the documents in her hands, then at Cale, who had given up everything to deliver them. A plan formed in her mind. Desperate, dangerous, but it was the only chance they had. "Can you fire a rifle?" He nodded, though they both knew he could. "Barely see doplights. Then we're going to make them come to us, and when they do, we're going to make sure every word in these papers gets read." She checked her father's rifle, counting the bullets. 6 shots, maybe 7 if she was lucky. One way or another, this instant. A torch appeared at the edge of the waterfall, illuminating the falling water. A voice called out, echoing through the canyon. Marshal Reeves. He'd survived the shootout at her house and followed them here to finish what he'd started 5 years ago. Reeves stepped through the waterfall alone, his pistol drawn but pointed at the ground. His clothes were torn, blood staining his shoulder where one of his own men had shot him during the chaos at the house. He looked older in the torchlight, worn down by years of carrying secrets. "It's over, Willa. Come out and we can talk." She stood at the back of the cave, rifle aimed at his chest. Cale sat propped against the wall beside her, conscious but barely. The documents were spread at her feet, visible in the torchlight. "Talk like you talked to my father before you shot him." Reeves's eyes found the papers and something in his face crumbled. He wouldn't listen. "I try to make him understand. The territory needs to be settled. Families need land. Sometimes hard choices have to be made." "Hard choices?" She almost laughed. "You murdered innocent people and called it progress. You killed your best friend too. Keep him quiet. Those aren't hard choices, they're evil ones. Your father was going to destroy everything. Good families, good men. All because he couldn't see the bigger picture." Reeves took a step closer. "I didn't want to kill him, but he gave me no choice. There's always a choice. He chose to do what was right. You chose to do what was easy." Cale's voice cut through the tension. weak but steady. She has your confession. Everything you just said. These walls echo. Your men heard every word. Reeves's face went pale. He turned toward the waterfall, where shadows moved just beyond the falling water. His own men listening, witnessing, understanding finally what they'd been part of. They'll kill us all now, Reeves said quietly. You think they'll let any of us walk out of here knowing what we know? The ranchers who paid for those bounties, they have more power than you can imagine. They'll bury this deeper than your father's grave. Not if it reaches the territorial governor first. Willow pulled a sealed envelope from inside her shirt. My father was thorough. He sent copies to newspaper editors, to federal marshals, to politicians who actually care about the law. It was a bluff. But Reeves couldn't. Be sure. All this time you thought you'd won. You'd already lost. Something broke. In Reeves then, the last defense, the final justification. He'd killed his best friend for nothing. The secret he'd murdered to protect was already out. He raised his pistol, but not at Willa. At himself. Don't. Her voice stopped him. You want to die? Fine. But first, you're going to walk out of this canyon and tell everyone exactly what you did. You're going to speak my father's name and admit you murdered him. You owe him that much. They'll hang me. Yes, they will. And you'll deserve it. She lowered her rifle slightly. But if you do this, if you tell the truth, maybe someday someone will remember that in the end you did one decent thing. Maybe that'll count for something. Reeves stood frozen, the pistol shaking in his hand. Outside, his men were arguing, voices rising. The situation was deteriorating fast. In minutes, they'd come through that waterfall shooting, and everyone in the cave would die. Kyle pulled himself upright with enormous effort. Your father forgave me for not saving him, for failing. His voice was directed at Reeves. His last words, he said, tell them the truth. Make them understand. He believed people were better than their worst. Moments. Tears ran down Reeves's face, cutting tracks through the grime. I'm not better than this. This is all I am. Then prove him wrong or prove him right. Your choice. Will's finger moved to the rifle trigger. But choose now because those men out there are out of patience. A gunshot echoed through the canyon, then another. Shouting erupted. Outside the cave, the men were fighting among themselves. The alliance fractured by distrust and fear. Reeves made his decision. He fired 3 shots through the waterfall, then threw his pistol at Willa's feet. I'll tell them everything. He turned toward the waterfall. But you need to get him to a doctor. He's dying. I know. There's a settlement 2 hours north. Doctor named Chun. Tell him I sent you. He'll help. Reeves paused at the edge of the waterfall. Your father was the best man I ever knew. I'm sorry I wasn't worthy of his friendship. Then, he stepped through the water and into the chaos beyond, shouting orders to men who no longer feared him, drawing fire. Toward himself, giving them time. We'll grab the documents in Kyle's arm. Can you walk? Do I have a choice? Not even a little. They moved toward the waterfall as gunfire echoed through the canyon. This was their only chance, and they were going to take it. Dr. Chun worked through the night. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound, stitching deeper than Willa had. Been able to, stopping the bleeding that had nearly killed Kale twice. The settlement was small, barely more than a trading post. But Chun had real medical training and supplies Willa couldn't have dreamed of. She waited outside his clinic as dawn broke over the mountains. The documents clutched against her chest. Every page was proof. Every name was justice delayed, but not denied. When Chun finally emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. He'll live, but it was close. Another hour and infection would have taken him. Relief flooded through her so powerfully. She had to sit down. Kyle would live after everything. After the bullet and the fall and the blood loss, he would survive to see his promise fulfilled. 3 weeks later, Willis stood in the territorial governor's office. The documents spread across his desk. Beside her stood a federal marshal brought in, specifically to investigate the claims. Across from them sat 5 newspaper editors, their pencils moving furiously. As she spoke, She told them everything about her father's investigation, about the bounties paid by wealthy ranchers to clear Apache families from valuable land, about Marshall Reeves and his men, who'd turned law enforcement into assassination for profit, about James Blaine's murder witnessed by a young Apache man who'd carried proof across hostile territory to honor a dead man's wish. The editors printed every word. Within days, the story reached every settlement, every town, every territory office. The ranchers who paid the bounties were arrested. The surviving members of Reeves' group were hunted down and tried. Some hanged, others imprisoned for life. Marshall Thomas Reeves never made it to trial. He died in a canyon that night, shot by his own men when he turned on them. But before he died, he'd given a full confession to 3 witnesses. His last act, his only act of redemption, had been telling the truth. Willow returned to her ranch to find it had been burned to the ground. Reeves's men had destroyed it in a final act of spite, but she didn't mourn the loss. The ranch had been her father's dream, built on hope for a better territory. Now she could build her own dream on the foundation of truth he'd left behind. She used the settlement money from the territorial government to buy new land, not a ranch this time, a school. The first in the territory to accept both settler and Apache children. It took 2 years to build. 2 years of fighting, prejudice, and fear. But she built it anyway. Cale helped. His wound had healed into a thick scar, but he was strong again, whole again. He taught the Apache children their language, their history, the stories his sister had told him before she died. Willa taught reading, writing, mathematics. Together, they created something neither of them could have built alone. On the anniversary of her father's death, Willa placed fresh flowers on his grave. The headstone had been replaced with a proper one, paid for by the governor himself. It no longer read accidental death. It read murdered while defending the innocent. Below that, a single line, truth cannot be buried. Kyle stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said in the choices they'd made, the lives they'd saved, the future they were building. She touched the medallion hanging around her neck, her father's medallion, the object that had changed everything. It had revealed the truth about his death, brought justice to those who'd killed him, and connected her to a man who'd risked everything to honor a promise. Some debts could never be repaid, Cale had said, only honored. Standing there in the morning sun, with the school behind them and the future ahead, Will Blaine finally understood what her father had died protecting. Not just innocent lives, not justice, but the possibility that people from different worlds could choose to see each other's humanity, could choose to build something better than hatred. That was the truth worth dying for. And now, it was the truth worth living for. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch. Another powerful tale from the frontier where courage and destiny collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more stories like this one.